The article we will be looking at is Engaging Whiteness, How Racial Power Gets Reified in Education by Kathy Hytten from Southern Illinois University and John Warren from Bowling Green State University. Our work is about how students engage in a class that focuses on the political and social power of whiteness, specifically how whiteness gets inscribed and reified in our education practices, even as we try to disrupt its normative influence. Our ideas are influenced by Alice McIntyre's work from 1997. Whiteness influences and informs our teaching and does so in ways that protect and privilege the cultural center of whiteness. Our research question: how does whiteness get so inscribed and reified in our education practices? There were 15 students and 1 professor as participants in our study, 8 doctoral students and 7 masters. There were 7 men and 9 women, 2 identified as African American and 14 identified as white. We studied how students engage in strategic rhetorics of whiteness, even while working to see how whiteness plays out in their everyday lives, in educational systems, and in the various readings offered in the course. Our study was qualitative. With regards to exploring our unsettledness, what was it that our students, that we, did not see or did not understand? Why did we and they not progress further? The questions driving the study: how do students interact with discourse of whiteness studies? And how and why do students persist and/or resist engagements with whiteness? We conducted interviews with 8 of our participants. We designed the assignments so that they involved written reflections in the readings and issues they raised. And all students were required to write 2-page reflection papers due in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th weeks of class about what it means to be white, how they engage racism in their lives, and how they've experienced the culture of power. Further, they all chose 5 issues to write reflective essays on over the course of the semester. Free writes during class and facilitative handouts on the readings, and a final summative personal reflection rounded out their assignments for the class. Altogether, there were about 20 pages of writing for each student, plus field notes. Some of our theoretical analytical framework was based on work by Michel de Certeau in 1988, Strategy versus Tactic. A tactic is a space of resistance. A strategy is a move of power asserted by those already in power. Basing many of our assignments with writing, we were using an ethnographic writing approach. Ethnographic is relating to the scientific description of peoples and cultures with their customs, habits, and mutual differences. Ethnographic writing, then, is literally writing culture and based on the culture of the people in the study. We therefore had a combination design approach, using interviews and ethnographic writing. 4 trends or patterns emerged, resulting in our key findings. Our first finding: appeals to self. First, they draw on a discourse of connections. From their own experience or social positionality, they cite a parallel status to oppressed groups in an effort to show how their experiences are comparable. Second, discourse absorption. They highlight their own guilt, embarrassment, and struggle in confronting white privilege and in dealing with their newly revealed ignorance about diversity issues. Third, where they compare their own beliefs and behaviors with more openly and obviously racist significant others, often affirming themselves through disassociation with their much more overtly racist friends and family. Next is appeals to progress. The lure of progress is common in students' interactions with the whiteness literature. Progress gets talked about and called upon in several different ways. 2 ways in which students appeal to progress are the discourse of fix-it and the discourse of market. The discourse of fix-it is basically a call to action, accompanied by missionary-like zeal to make immediate changes. Second, progress gets called upon in a significantly different way, in order to show how far we've actually come as a society in race relations, basically saying we're taking steps in the right directions. This is the discourse of market. Next, appeals to authenticity. When appealing to authenticity, students call on particular experiences to validate their thinking about diversity issues and to seek answers from non-whites about what they should do in specific situations or how they should think. There are 3 ways in which students use appeal to authenticity. The first is discourse of others. Using this, they aim to use the voices of non-whites to ascertain the definitive or authentic answer on some issue. Alternatively, students cite their own experiences to counter or contradict non-white voices. In this discourse of yes, but, they seem to cognitively understand others' experiences, but in a subtle form of resistance, suggest that they do not match the way they experience the world. The third type of appeal to authenticity is in the discourse of scholarly authority. This happens when students cite academic sources to justify their claims, typically in ways that serve to defend and grant legitimacy to their personal experiences. The fourth trend is appeals to extremes. When students appeal to extremes as they interact with the whiteness discourse, they engage in either-or thinking. There are several ways in which students appeal to extremes. First, the discourse of the real versus the ideal largely functions as a form of cynicism and pessimism in light of the difficulty of enacting lasting social change. Second is the discourse of niceness versus conflict, and students argue that the culture of whiteness, specifically as it manifests in the classroom, is one of niceness. At the same time, students occasionally talk about how, in order for our discussions to be really productive, we need more conflict, disagreement, and argument. Third, in the discourse of voice versus silence, students struggle with how their voices as white people should come into play in discussions about multiculturalism. The possibility in discourses of whiteness lies in the hope that by identifying the structure of discourses of whiteness, we might be able to construct critical rereadings of these constructions in ways that work to disrupt the foundation upon which cultural power rests. By recognizing how students explicitly dealing with whiteness work to secure the dominance of the center, we can start thinking about how we all work to reproduce the systems. Examining how our students appeal to particular logic in order to reiterate their own social power helps focus on the discursive constructions of privilege in which schooling is based. If we can begin to see the ways students resist, we can then also begin to answer and problematize those practices as well as cultivate more productive and enabling interactions with whiteness. The pedagogical question of whiteness, how we come to conceive of our task in teaching critical, cultural, liberatory education, is a question of engagement, critique, and active examination of how our very talk about our subject continues to reify it. This pedagogical questioning of whiteness is just the beginning as we work to move our conversations of whiteness, racism, and power to deeper and more complex levels.